All right. Good morning, GPAR. This is Matt Braden here from the GPAR team. Hope everyone is doing well. So glad to see you on this Friday, in which the sun is out right now, and hopefully it stays that way. But that's probably not going to happen because it has just been a constant cloudy, rainy kind of weather pattern. But anyway, kind of ties in what we're talking about today and our workshop. But before we get to today's workshop, let's talk about next week. On Thursday, 8:30 in the morning, we're going to have coffee talk. President Stephanie Biello will be welcoming City Councilman Alan Dom. He is going to give his thoughts and impressions about the budget that was just introduced by Mayor Kenny yesterday for consideration for City Council as they enter into their budgetary process, which will wrap up by the end of June. And usually that somehow impacts the real estate industry in either direct or indirect ways. Also, too, Councilman Don will be with us to talk about the legislative package that he just entered last week as it relates to various taxes within the city and his approach to doing some tax reform on things that can go ahead and, in his view, improve the way the city operates and conducts its business, as well as making it more attractive for people to come to Philadelphia, set up shop, and to grow our economic engine in a bunch of different ways. So we hope you will join us for that. Keep an eye on your inbox for messages from GPAR about login information. And again, that's next Thursday at 8:30 in the morning. So let's get to today. We are so happy to have Bill Dare with us from Spotlight Home Inspection. Bill did a workshop with us a number of months ago. It was a great opportunity for our members to learn about his craft, his trade, the work that he does, as well as for you guys to get some answers to questions that you may have felt you didn't have or were afraid to ask, and just be in this cool little learning environment. So we're going to do the same thing again today, and we're going to be talking about that really fun topic of stucco. And some of the stuff has been going on out in the suburbs. It's now making its way into Philadelphia, and it's more noticeable here in our immediate marketplace. It's really important to know that Bill is, he stands above his peers as it relates to the work that he does. He's a professional leader. He's an educator. I could go on and on, but he's a really great voice for us to have here. So I give the floor right now to Bill Dare. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. I'm not sure who that guy is. I hope he shows up soon. But I'm super excited to be here with you today. We're gonna put on a PowerPoint presentation. I am going to give you plenty of time at the end to ask questions, and we also are always available to review problems that you're encountering in the world. If you go find me and send me an email, send me a report or whatever. This is a large part of what my part of this business does. We have 7 inspectors in the field. And so they take care of most of the heavy lifting, and I take care of just fielding questions from real estate agents because we think you need to have a resource out there. So we're excited to be here and talk to you a bit about the siding problems in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. As the intro piece said, it is become much more apparent in the city than it was some time ago. So, it's a good place to start. And we're going to jump right in here. I'm going to put this PowerPoint up, and you should be seeing a PowerPoint. It says Spotlight Home Inspection Stucco Presentation GPAR. So a couple of things that we want to cover today. What is stucco? Well, we're not talking about EIFS. That's at the bottom there. That's not a typical system that we see. It does exist in and around Philadelphia, but generally speaking, we're talking about hard coat stucco, which is basically cement on a wall. This also covers manufactured stone veneer, or MSV, lick 'em, stick 'em, whatever you want to call them. So those things are included in this, but quite honestly, you can have water intrusion behind almost any siding. So, but predominantly, we're going to be talking about stucco and MSV today. Go the other way. So why are you hearing so much about this? And I assume you're hearing about it. Maybe that's a poor assumption, but I think most agents are pretty much not amused by the whole stucco conversation and would prefer to list the house with vinyl siding. Well, the building boom that occurred, and it's occurring again, and we're kind of seeing much of the same repeat of situation in the building boom that we're experiencing now, as we did in the mid 2000s. And so there's a lot of houses trying to be built in a very short period of time, which means that not everybody's watching as close, and there's a need for contractors. The higher percentage of homes are built with stucco now. In the city, they've been built with stucco for a long time, but most of that stuff that you see on the older houses is over block or brick. So it's over a masonry substrate, which wasn't really a problem. It's when we started putting it over wood more recently that it becomes quite a problem. The home inspectors are aware of the problem. So when you're getting a home inspection, if you didn't have to waive every inspection you ever had to do lately, the home inspector is going to talk to you about the stucco installation and the potential for problems, and the increased consumer and professional awareness. I would argue that most real estate agents have had to deal with this on any, several levels over the years, and have gotten burned by it maybe even. So it's quite a big problem. The primary causes of siding failures, amazingly, really, the stucco is not technically the issue. The stucco is just in our way. It's not a very forgiving product. The vinyl siding lets a lot of air behind there, so that it tends to dry out, where stucco and veneer stone are like a sponge, and water will get behind it, and the moisture needs to be managed back behind the stucco and stone, and a lot of times it is not. Oh, there you go. Unskilled, unsupervised labor. Sorry, we just added a line to this slide. Unskilled, unsupervised labor is also a huge problem. It's I would say that it's a more significant problem in the city of Philadelphia, because it's harder to get contractors to go to Philadelphia because of a lot of different restrictions on parking and travel and whatnot. So my experience with trying to find good contractors in the city of Philadelphia to do the repairs for my clients has been that it's difficult to get good skilled labor into the city. It's just too much more work for them outside of the city, where it's a lot easier. So unskilled, unsupervised labor building these houses. New building materials, oriented strand board replaced plywood about 15 or 20 years ago, which was a huge impact, because oriented strand board is the plywood that looks like it's big wood chips pressed into a sheet. It's not a very forgiving product. It does not dry out very well, and it tends to rot really fast. We went to a synthetic building wrap. Back in the old days, we used to use tar paper, which was a really good system of keeping the moisture out, and it also would tend to let the wall dry out if it did get wet. The synthetic wraps are really thin and fixed for what's called a perm rating, so it tends to trap the water back there more readily. And then windows that they said were self-flashing, which tended to not be self-flashing and ended up leaking. They omitted some stuff in these things, which, sill pan flashings or whatever, that really have created a lot of trouble for us in the construction world. I think it's really important, if you take anything away from this conversation today, these next couple of slides are going to really, I think, hopefully anyway, as real estate agents, puts this into perspective for you. There's two ways that we, and most guys, I would assume, in this industry, evaluate stucco. And the first is, was it installed properly or to industry standard? And I would answer to you that we do over 1,000 stucco inspections a year and another 1,000+ home inspections a year. And I would say that rarely is it actually installed the way it's supposed to be installed. Missing details such as weave screeds, soft joints between stucco and dissimilar materials are common. Most stucco is about half as thick as it should be. It's generally about a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch thick, and it's required to be nearly an inch thick, 7/8 is minimum. And that's not the way it's supposed to have been done. Most of these details, other than thickness, are easily seen on a typical home inspection at a visual inspection. These are deficiencies in installation. However, it does not mean that the system has failed to protect the house. So the first way we're going to evaluate stucco is, was it installed right? And unfortunately, a lot of times that's not the case. The second is the system, most of which is hidden behind the cladding, protecting the structure? Is water getting to the wood in quantity sufficient to cause harm? And this can only really be evaluated through invasive testing. We're going to talk about thermal imaging here in a little bit, but it can only be done in my humble opinion, through invasive testing by drilling small holes in the cladding and getting back there with a moisture meter, checking the condition of the wood and checking the moisture content in the wood. Most of this damage is caused by improperly installed windows, doors, and kick-out flashings. There are other areas of damage, but the vast majority of what we see has to do with improperly installed doors, windows, and kick-outs. Kick-out is a flashing detail at the end of a roof wall intersection, and the roof comes down and ends on a wall. There's supposed to be a flashing there. I think I have a picture of it later. Some damage is caused by inferior water resistant barriers, commonly known as house wraps, such as Tyvek, felt, paper, GPAR is another one. I don't want to impugn any particular product. They are all struggling with this, and it has a lot more to do with how that was installed than the actual product. We've got a short video here. I think this is going to work. This is on our website. This is geared for you to use with your clients to try to help them get a grip on what it is we're dealing with and how we're going to evaluate it. We'll try to get through it as quick as we can. I think it's only like a minute and a half long. Stucco inspection could be better described as moisture and damage mapping behind siding. This could be stucco, veneer stone, brick, cement board, siding material. Proper inspection must get through the siding material so that testing can occur in the wood substrate.
Can't hear.
Oh, we can't hear anything.
Oh, sorry. Let me see. My volume's all the way up. I'll tell you what. Just go to the website and you can check it out. It basically just talks about, and I don't know why you can't hear it. I apologize for that. But you can check it out on the website on spotlighthi.com. So there's a kick out flashing. It just it shows you how we do the test. I think most people are really worried that the house is going to look like it's got chicken pox after we're done, and that's just not the case. And it shows you what the holes look like after they're caulked. So it's a good resource for people that are concerned about having their house tested for stucco. So this is a kick out flashing. You can see the water comes down. This is the wall up here. Can you see my cursor? And then this is the roof here, and this flashing detail in green and in light teal here is supposed to direct the water out out from behind the siding material. This is the actual location. You can see the gutter down here, the shingles to the right, and the stucco up here. And you can see that behind that is about a ½ an inch of material that the water can get behind. And this is what it looks like with the stucco removed. So these are called step flashings. The paper's supposed to come out, and then the kickout flashing is supposed to be down here. And this is what happens when it's not properly installed or left out altogether, which is very common. As you can see, all this wood rot, this is the side of a chimney. So the kickout flashing is one of the most dramatic, concentrated problem areas for us in a stucco inspection. And I will say that this is hugely common for anytime there's this location. We find this a high percentage of the time. We find damage or moisture below there. What's happening behind the stucco? Primarily the OSB sheeting or the wood sheathing is getting wet and rotting away. One of the things in that video we talked about is the different types of substrate behind the stucco. So anything built in the last 20 or 25 years is going to have OSB or plywood typically. But back in the early days being the 70s, 80s, and really early 90s, they may have used rigid foam. They may have used exterior grade gypsum, homosote. These are things really hold up pretty well to moisture because they technically have a secondary barrier embedded on them that helps them prevent water from soaking in, and they don't deteriorate like wood. So when we get to wood, that's where our problems really begin. And OSB, it really accelerated. So the OSB sheeting is getting wet. Now, it's not the end of the world because nobody ever promised you the wall would never get wet. However, it can't get wet all the time, and it can't stay wet for very long before the problems start to creep up. In many cases, this will produce wood rot and potentially mold growth in the OSB. Occasionally, the framing and the drywall gets impacted. I was on a case 2 days ago, and they pulled it off, and there was all kinds of spore-like growth growing on the back of the drywall. That is not very common, but it does happen occasionally. This generally takes place in the first 3 to 5 years. I've seen it as fast as 18 months. We did a house a while back that was 18 months old and it had already started to deteriorate. It just has to do with how much water gets there, how often it gets there, and how long it stays there. And these are variables that are different on virtually every house. But usually in the first 3 to 5 years, you're starting to see problems if there's a flashing issue. If left unchecked, the problems will grow and move further down the wall. So what we saw here a minute ago had been going on for, I think the house was like 9 or 10 years old, that kick out flashing with the damage. We've got other pictures. So it'll continue to move down the wall and rot its way down there. Eventually it'll get into the framing, the studs and that are framing up the wall and damage the framing. And as I said a minute ago, the damage is commensurate with how much water gets in, how often it gets in, how long it stays there. And that's the issue with stucco and veneer stone, and to a lesser degree, brick and stack stone, is they don't tend to let air behind there to let the system dry out. Add to that some kind of a vinyl wallpaper on the inside or a bookcase, and it's even harder for that wall to dry if it gets wet. So here's some horror story pictures. This is, I wish this was uncommon. Unfortunately, virtually every day I'm somewhere where they're taking stucco off of a house to see the damage. A lot of the recent stuff is involved in litigation, so I can't share it. But this was, this house I think was about 3.5 to 4 years old when they took this apart. You can see that it has DuPont tieback on it. The head flashing is improperly lapped. The paper goes behind it. This damage above the window is actually being caused by the window above that. The OSB deteriorates rather rapidly, so we get a large amount of damage in a really confined area, and then it kind of tends to spread out. This is a deck ledger above here, and then there's a door just above that, a big slider, and at the corners of the door you can see where the water is coming down and damaging the stucco because the deck was not properly flashed and the door was not properly flashed. This is about as bad as it gets. The OSB, you can actually see the insulation poking through here. So this was a complete failure of the house wrap that was on there. There were too many holes in it, too much water. This is, I believe, a north facing wall because the direction a wall faces plays a role in this. If we get a lot of sun on the wall, we don't see quite as much deterioration, but this is not, I would say, typical to what we see. This is an extreme case. This is what I'm going to show you the pictures after this, but this is what this house looked like when we just did a home inspection on this house. And, but inside on this home inspection, you can see this damage up in this corner. This is directly below that bump out window we just saw. And this is structural damage to the floor joists. These are TJI floor joists, and you can literally stick a screwdriver right through it. And it's probably, we're not allowed to call mold. We have to call it a spore-like growth, but that's probably a mold growing on there. This is the subfloor up here. This is the rim board. It's important to know that that piece of wood is nearly 1.5 inches thick, and it's rotted far worse on the outside than the inside. So these are things that a typical home inspector should be picking up for you on a home inspection, looking at a stucco or a veneer stone house to try to clue you in that there's more problems on the outside. So we want to basically help ourselves the best we can to come to a point where we can call for that further evaluation. This house was less than 4 years old when this happened. They took all the stucco off of the house. This was a failure of the house wrap, so there was no drainage mat behind the stucco. This whole development basically looked like this. It was a really big problem obviously for these homeowners. I believe an insurance company for the builder stepped up on most of these and helped offset the cost of this, but this was, I believe, about a $190,000 stucco remediation on this one particular house, and most of the houses in this development exceeded $150,000. So these numbers are staggering. They're mind-boggling, and they're difficult to deal with. So this is why this course is important, why your understanding of the problem exists is important, so that you can help guide your clients, whether they're buying or selling, as to how to best manage this data. In the video that you couldn't hear, we did talk about having this done as a pre-listing. And I think, again, if you have a great inspector and you know, they're doing a great job for you, this is not a commercial for Spotlight. We're just trying to help you, give you the data the best we can. Just keep using your inspector. However, um, the ability to do this before the house hits the marketplace, the ability to understand these problems while it's still not listed, and we have the opportunity to make repairs at our own pace and at our own cost, versus having the buyer dictate how you're going to fix the house and how much money they're going to give you. Because I know a lot of buyers, and I've never really met one that would accept $10,000 for a $10,000 problem. They want $10,000 and enough to go to Disneyland on top of it. So having the information in advance and being able to manage it in advance is critical. So the whole front of this house, you can see all these black areas are all where the wood has started to rot. And it had very much to do with the fact that the house wrap that was on there was so heavily damaged by staples and whatnot that it created a problem. This is that same development, a different house, same idea. And I don't know whoever thought of it was a great idea to build a wall 35 feet high, no overhang on the roof, and put a bunch of windows in it. But this is what you get when you do that. So again, these houses are only 4 years old or so, and we have this amount of damage. This is kind of what it looks like under the window. So they taped the bottom of the window, which is incorrect. Now, none of this you can see on a typical home inspection or even on a typical stucco inspection. This is just because the stucco has been removed to get a clue. The water was already behind this from above and came down and rotted out behind the window. What I think you need to understand, or what your inspector needs to understand, is where you drill the hole to test this is critical. We've come behind a number of inspectors that didn't understand that they needed to be about 6 to 8 inches down and out on this corner. They need to drop down outside the corner of the window about 6 to 8 inches down and be testing here. There's plenty of houses that the wood right up under here is good. So I've seen inspectors test way in from the corner and close to the bottom of the window where they're never going to find the problem. The problem exists out here to the right of the window in this particular case, of the left if we were looking at the other side. If you look at the previous picture here, you can see all the damage occurs on this particular house and in most houses at the corners of the windows. And if you drill too close to those windows, you're not going to find it in a lot of cases. So we want to understand that the experience of the stucco inspector is important, that he knows where to put those probes to find the problem. Because if I drill over here, or if I drill over here, I'm not going to find a problem. So what should we do about it? If you have a house with stucco or veneer stone, have it inspected. I can't stress to you the importance of having the information as quick as we can reasonably get it. Information is power. It's the key that drives our business. It's what makes some agents great agents and some agents not as great, because great agents have lots of help, lots of people that they can lean on, and lots of good information, and they're great people. And we appreciate all of you being here today. But having that information sooner than later is a definite advantage, where we can work on what solutions are, and we're always happy to help do that, to help come up. We don't do any stucco repairs, but I do think it's important to have the ability to run a report by your inspector, have them weigh in on it, and also what the solutions would be. You're not going to buy a stucco veneer stone house built in the last 20 years. Now, if it was built before 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they're far less likely to have a problem. But you can't really buy one without an invasive inspection. My cousin is trying to buy a stucco house, and as in today's environment, everybody's trying to waive everything, and I simply wouldn't allow her to buy it without a stucco inspection. Lo and behold, it turns out there was an inspection done 2 years prior that all of a sudden appeared in front of us, and it had all these problems behind the stucco. So you need to cover yourself as an agent. One of the classes we give talks about waiving inspections. PAR actually has a document on it that you need to be careful and get something signed that says that it wasn't your bright idea to waive all the inspections, because if they buy that house and then there's problems afterwards that come up, they're going to remember that whole conversation differently later, that, oh my gosh, my agent told me not to get an inspection and now I've got all these problems. So you really should have, I think there's even documents out there, most of the brokers have them, that need to be signed by a buyer buying a house without inspections, that that they've been warned that there are risks associated with that. A lot of what we're doing now is post-settlement inspections for the buyer, so at least they have that information. Let's see, how do we inspect the veneer stone and stucco? Well, the non-destructive we talked about earlier is basically a home inspection. We're going to look at the installation details. We're going to look for any evidence of physical damage. We're going to inspect the flashings. Do they exist? Are there kick-out flashings at that location on the roof wall intersection? Because if there's not, there's a high probability that there's problems below that. We're going to inspect the penetrations of building oil, such as the hose bibs, electrical meters, and fixtures and shutters. Inspection of the interior drywall, exposed sheathing below the doors and basements. And we also look at the tops of the windows on a typical home inspection. This is all the non-destructive stuff we can do. So we can go into the attic a lot of times and see if what's happening up there, if there's dormers. Then we can also go and look at the head of the window. When you go inside and look at the top of the window, if there's tea stains, what we call, they're like a light brown stain on the tops of the windows, that's a pretty good indication that there's a problem behind the stucco above there. Invasive is what we basically are talking about here today. It's the only way to really understand what it is we're dealing with in a world of stucco. We're going to drill small holes, excuse me, about a quarter of an inch in diameter, about half the size of a pencil. There's 2 holes per test location. So under the corner of each window, under the corner of each door, at the kickout locations, people oftentimes ask me how many holes I'm going to drill, and I go, just enough. There's going to be more than you think, because we're going to use that information to then follow up and maybe test some additional areas. Because once we find damage or high moisture readings, and we'll talk about moisture readings here in a second, we're going to want to know how pervasive that is. Is it a size of a basketball, or does it look like the back of one of those houses we just showed you with the stucco taken off? We use a moisture meter. We use what's called a Delmhorst BD 2100, which is pretty much the industry standard. It's got a set of probes. It's unfortunate you didn't get to see the video because you see all that happen on the video. We're also checking to see the condition of the wood. It's not just important that the water content is there, because oftentimes as wood deteriorates, it loses its ability to hold moisture. So it's not uncommon for us to get a low moisture reading, but the wood's all rotted. So we're gonna check the condition of the wood, and all that gets reported onto a stucco report that is easy to understand. If any of you have looked at these, some of these are a little difficult. We literally take pictures of the house, put the readings right on the picture, so you know exactly where we tested and exactly what the result was. So it's simple for anybody to look at it and understand that, you know, if there are problems or there are not problems. When we find a problem, especially on a real estate transaction where we're working for the buyer, we need to confirm with that so that the seller gets it. And this has been one of the biggest fundamental changes. I got into this business a number of years ago because my sister bought a big stucco house about 15 or 16 years ago, and big brother, me, inspected it for her. And 2 weeks after she moves in, water's pouring in the windows, and my mother called me to tell me to, under no circumstances, that big brother was going to help his sister with this. And that's how I got into stucco. A guy by the name of Mickey Thomas is one of the forefathers of this industry. He's passed now years ago. And I trained with him, talked to him, and he helped me get through my sister's project. But I said to Mickey, I said, that can never happen again. I never want to go through another process where we missed the fact that there was a stucco problem on the house. So that was the genesis of where we got into this and why we got into this. So being a salesman to the seller is hard, because the seller doesn't believe anything that the home inspector says, because what do we know, right? He knows the house, there's nothing wrong with his house. It's perfect. He never saw water in it. So we're going to drill a 1-inch core sample. It's about the size of a dime. And we're going to take a 1-inch piece of stucco out of the wall so we can photograph the rotted wood. And that goes right into the report so that the seller can see that we understand what it is we found. And it shortcuts the whole argument back and forth about there's nothing wrong behind my stucco. So it's really an advantageous piece of this that started happening a number of years ago. We didn't used to core like that as readily. So the core has opened this up to us to be able to get to the point where everybody understands, yeah, we have rotted wood, now what? Those are what the holes look like. You can see the corner.
Question?
Yes, go.
I have two questions, actually. One is, how do you test the stone veneer, and how do you plug these 1-inch holes after you've completed the test?
That's a great question. And again, I apologize you didn't see the video. It's all on there. So the holes are caulked with a color matched caulk the best we can. I mean, if you've got rose colored stucco, we might have a problem, but we're going to caulk the holes. The 1-inch piece that comes out, we actually do what's called a core. So there's a, it's not, we don't obliterate the stucco for 1 inch. We actually take out a piece with a really thin diamond blade coring bit. And then once that piece is out and we photograph and document it, we're going to put caulk into the back of the hole to fill it up and reconstitute the WRB and plug that hole. You can't, in most cases, you can't tell that we've even been there, even with the 1-inch hole. I think this picture after this shows you the holes caulked, but but it's important to understand that more often than not, rarely do we put a core into a wall where there's not already damage. So we're basically coring on a wall where we already know that there needs to be repairs made. So I'm not overly concerned about it, although I've never seen any evidence that the coring or the drilling has created a problem, although some builders have made a big deal out of it. I would tell you that, for all the millions of holes we've drilled, we've never been sued or never had a builder take us to task other than to just complain about us. So in fact, we work for a number of builders. So I work on both sides of this. I don't just work for homeowners. I work for a number of builders as a consultant. So they trust us enough to understand that the process now is heavily vetted and well understood. So those are what the drill holes look like. That's what the meter. Oh, hello. That's what the meter looks like. So that's a BD 2100. The pins, the handle, the clear handle above it is going in to the wall there, and then you're seeing a 28% moisture content. We expect wood to have a moisture content of about 7 to 12%. That's considered normal by the American Plywood Association, 7 to 12%. I don't get too excited until I hit about 18%. At 18% and above, I think we've got enough of a problem that we need to at least consider what our options are. Now, if we're doing this for a real estate transaction or we're working for the buyer, the only option there with a guarantee is going to be to take the stucco off in that particular area, at least on that wall, make the repairs and put it back together, because that's the only thing that anybody's going to guarantee. If, on the other hand, we're working for a seller before the house is on the market, before there's interested parties, and it's just an elevated moisture reading, 18, 19, but no rotted wood, and the house is, we've got some options. We can look at the caulk joints around the windows. Were things properly sealed? Are there some things that we can do that may impact that moisture content? Now, we're not going to cover up that information to a buyer. We're going to tell them all about it. We're going to say, we found 20%, no wood rot. We've identified a potential problem above that area or around that area. And so we recommended caulking the windows or doing whatever, putting siloxane sealer on the stucco. And then we're going to come back in a few weeks and we're going to recheck that area. And if it drops down to a normal reading, which we hope it does, then we're going to report that. And we're going to explain that to your buyers that we've identified an elevated moisture reading. We've taken steps to abate that. And then we came back and confirmed it. Now, they are going to probably send all this data off to another stucco inspector or their home inspector, which is fine with me. I talk to these guys every day. I know almost every one of them. So it's a small community of stucco inspectors. There's not a lot of us out there. We all know each other, and I'm happy to have the conversation with anybody. But we want to give them a peace of mind that it's, that it's not perfect, but we do believe we've addressed the problem and we verified that. So that's the advantage to having it done in advance, is you have some options to deal with it. Once you get to about 28% of the wood's rotted, there's not too many options. You're going to have to take some stucco off to deal with that problem. And that, if you don't realize it, but those pins are in about an extra 1.5 inches deep. That was so bad. There was a roof parapet wall on a property in Philadelphia. It was so bad, I went and bought caution tape to put it on a spiral metal staircase that went up there, because I was scared to death the spiral staircase was going to fall off because it was so badly rotted. And this house was not that old. So that's how we test the moisture content. And we're also, again, testing the substrate, the wood and the framing below there. There's what the holes look like once they're caulked. Again, people are really freaked out by it, that they were worried that, that they're going to see them. And if I didn't point them out to you, if I just showed you this picture and asked you to find them, it would be hard pressed. And we're within a foot of that wall. We're not standing back at the sidewalk. So generally speaking, unless it's an unusual color, we carry dozens and dozens of tubes of caulk, different colors, to try to make that as benign as we can. This is what the core looks like when you drill in, when the wood's all rotted. That's an entertaining picture. If you're a seller and I tell you you've got rotted wood and I show you that picture, are you convinced? More than likely, we don't have much trouble. Once we get to the core picture for the seller, remember, we're working a lot of times for the buyer, and the seller doesn't believe anything the home inspector says. What's he know? He's an idiot. So this gets us to that point where we can talk to the seller really quickly and say, look, here's the picture of the rotted wood. It's easy to understand. It's easy to see it, and it makes the point. And then we can get on to the conversation about what's next. So that's what a core looks like. It looks huge in this picture, but it's the size of a dime. Moisture readings approaching or above 20% promote wood growth, mold growth, and wood rot. We talked about that. That's according to the American Plywood Association. This is not Bill's world. We're going to always draw from smarter people than me. So the American Plywood Association says at 20% and higher, you have this. Now the meter has a plus or minus of 2%. So that's why we use 18%. If you gave the meter a lot of data about what temperature the substrate is, what species of wood it is, there's a chart that'll help you adjust the actual reading to an adjusted reading. We're not going to know all those things. It's OSB. It could be anything. We don't know what kind of wood it is. We don't know what temperature it is. So we're just going to use the 18% because that gets us into an area where I'm confident that we're going to be accurate and know what we need to know. Soft damaged wood cannot be ignored, although typically there's no need to rush the repair. I think that's an important point. I have this conversation almost every day with somebody that's like, oh my gosh, I have problems behind my stucco. What do I need to do? I'm like, well, more often than not. Now, sometimes like that staircase we talked about where I thought it was in danger of coming off the wall, I think they needed to act more quickly. But the vast majority of the stucco inspections that we do, the repair does not need to happen like this year. If they wanted to wait a year or two, I think once we get to 3 or 4, it starts to bother me because I think they forget about it and it never happens. But most of these cases, especially when it's in the wintertime, you can't get the stucco repaired in time for closing. So we can have a conversation with your buyer or your seller to talk about how this can be remedied later. They can buy the house, move in, and then deal with it down the road somewhere. I'm going to leave it up to you guys how that gets financed because that's tricky, with the banks today and escrows being frowned upon and all this stuff. But that's why you guys get the big bucks. But you'll figure that out. But there is no, typically, very rarely is there a need for you to rush right out and get the stucco repaired unless you're trying to get to a closing date and the buyer won't accept anything but the repaired stucco.
Quick
Infrared, question. Yes, sir.
I've unfortunately had to deal with a number of these. And what I found is, and my apologies if you guys have touched on this previously, I came in a little late, but what I found is there's a huge price influx between stucco remediators from, I think one of the best deals we found on a particular project was, I think it came out to 11,000 and we had quotes of 75 plus. I know that all the groups that were in that higher price frame were only interested in doing a complete stucco remediation, where the gentleman we found was willing to patch the areas that actually had the issues, remove the plywood, put more plywood in, and then basically patchwork and try and match it as best they could, which they did a pretty good job. Obviously sunlight changes the color a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that? Basically, number one, why the huge price discrepancy, which I get it, is all around, or your thoughts on patching versus the whole remediation?
Well, it's a great question and it's very insightful because we deal with this a lot. My personal opinion on cutting around a window or a door in an attempt to not take the stucco off of that particular wall assembly tends to be problematic. Can it be done correctly? Yes. Is it often done correctly? No. More often than not, when we come in behind somebody that's been patching, it's difficult to integrate the old work and the new work. And as you stated, the appearance is not always that great, and some of them are downright ugly. So our position is generally, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, if you've got a problem on a wall that needs to have stucco removed, we're going to take off that entire wall. We don't need to strip the entire house, but in my humble opinion, you need to take that wall off, pull the doors and windows so sill pan flashings, which are almost never there, can be installed. And then there's a couple of things that kick in when you do that. First, you can do a code compliant repair now to today's code. Second, we didn't talk about drainage mats too much, but nowadays, and it'll be in the next code cycle, but PA is like 32 years behind in adopting the IRC. So I don't know, I think we're still working in 1912 IRC, but when we get around to adopting it, we will actually have the requirement for what's called a drainage mat. And it looks like a Brillo pad that goes between the stucco wire lath and the house wrap. And this creates about a 6 millimeter void that allows water that gets behind the stucco to drain out. And this is a huge, huge advantage to this particular system. There is not a single job that I have overseen in the last 4 or 5 years that I had anything to do with that I would allow to occur without this drainage mat, even though technically it's not code required. It's less than, typically, it's less than $1 a foot to install it. And it makes the situation so much better because we've given water a place to go if it does get back there. So we can put a drainage mat in if we do the entire wall. We can do a code compliant repair, and it doesn't look like patchwork quilt. And then lastly, you're going to get a warranty that means something more often than not if you're working with a good contractor on that repair. Very few contractors will give you a meaningful warranty, if any, on a patch job because they understand the limitations of that and how hard it is to get the new paper up underneath of the old paper without creating a problem. So we generally don't prefer patch repairs, even though I get it. The seller wants to spend as little on the thing as possible. My problem is that if you called me up and said, hey, Bill, somebody patched underneath all these windows after a stucco inspection, what do you think? I'm like, well, we're going to come out and test it again because my fail rate on that exceeds 60%. So 60 to 70% of those patch jobs, when I see them later, have failed already. So we're not in favor of patching. We're in favor of doing wall assemblies. Now, to your point, some of these bigger contractors have more work than they can do anyway, and they don't want the house unless they can do the entire house. That way they can warranty the entire house. And I have to respect their desire to be amazing, and most of them are. But I also respect the need to get this thing fixed for an economical method. And if we have one wall with problems, I don't need to strip 3 others. Did I answer your question?
You did, yeah. And also just a real quick point, which you briefly touched on just for all the other agents on here. I think it's proven invaluable to find an inspector who does not do the actual remediation as well, obviously due to a conflict of interest. So it's good that you guys just do the inspection, and then if there is an issue, to find a guy who only does the remediation.
Good point. We want to help you with that if we can. We maintain a list of stucco contractors that we work with. The list is changing from time to time because for whatever crazy reason, a guy could be amazing this year and not so amazing next year. But we're happy to help you any way we can to get you, because we want to be a good team player, right? And all the inspectors that I know that are great guys, they want to be a team player with you. They need to help you get from point A to point B. Your job is difficult. There's a lot of moving pieces. So if the more I can take of this, or the more any good inspector can take of this, the better your team is, and the better your ability to get through this as easily as can be. So yeah, we don't do any stucco repair, and I think to your point, I think that's a huge mistake. It's just why the home inspection industry is what it is, right? The state of Pennsylvania really put together a good home inspection law that says I can't even work on a house for 12 months after inspecting it. That is not true in all states. I can't have a financial interest in a house, and I can't even have a financial interest in a company that would come out and repair it later, even if it's not me personally. So I think that there's a lot of good protections built in for the consumer in this industry. Unfortunately, the stucco inspection industry is unregulated. You could print up a card and be a stucco inspector tomorrow. There's no requirements for education. There's no requirements for training. But
yeah, you can have a different LLC that's for the remediation. So it's imperative to make sure that someone's got a good history. We learned that the hard way as well. So it's imperative to know that, like you said, not only is your company not doing it, but you don't have any kickback with a different group just for saying, oh yeah, we found damage. Here's a guy. He'll give you a good deal. So no, that's good to know. And we used you guys before. You guys have always been top notch.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's important.
I have a quick
yeah, fire away.
Sorry. And I apologize if I missed this too. How are you handling, because I've been getting like a lot of, if I'm representing the buyer, a lot of like, kickback from sellers, obviously, when you start to, talk about drilling through their walls in many different places. So I was just wondering how, you're handling that kind of argument when the seller kind of gives you that pushback.
It's a good question. It's not something as common as it used to be back 10, 12 years ago. Yeah, it was a knockdown, drag them out fight with sellers all the time that didn't want to have a stucco inspection done. It's become more commonplace. It's more accepted in the industry. What I would say is if you have a seller that's concerned about it, have them call me directly and I'll talk them through it. We also, all my guys are instructed. We invite the seller, if we're working for a buyer or no matter what, we want as many, unlike a home inspection where I think it becomes challenging to have the owner looking over your shoulder when you're working for a buyer because he's got something to say about everything you say. That's a completely opposite on a stucco inspection. We want the homeowner to be there because we want to educate them. We want to show them why we know what we know and where the problems are. Because remember, it's easy for me to go there and inspect the house, pump out a report and cash my check and drive away. It's much harder for the aftermath of this. So the more that I can prepare the person who owns the house for the next steps, the better off we're going to be. So we invite, if the seller's concerned, we invite them to be there for the inspection. We will answer their questions. It's their house. We invite them to see the first set of holes drilled and the patching that occurs. We don't like to get limited by that. We don't really want them saying, well, if I don't like the holes, you're not going any further. But that just hasn't been much of a problem lately. They sign an authorization form. We put these videos online on our website so they can go and watch, because I think that's a really good tool for the buyer to use to learn about what it is we're doing. And it's also a good tool for the seller to learn what's going to happen to their house. So I would say that it's not quite as big a problem in general. The biggest problem we're having right now is no seller wants to let you do anything, right? Because the inventory is nil. Most of my agents are saying they've got to waive all their inspections to even get the deal accepted. So that's the biggest challenge we have. So I don't know what's happening with that. I think that's immoral personally, but you shouldn't have to waive your inspection to buy a house. Now, I don't really worry about somebody buying a $1.6 million house. I figure if something goes wrong, they're going to be okay. It's the single mom buying a $150,000 house that I think I really worry about, that they're going to buy something without inspections because they had to get it and then have a problem afterwards. So I do worry about that. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, no, I appreciate that you can, you're willing to include the seller and kind of guide them through it. I don't obviously get it all the time, the pushback, but I have gotten it before where people are like, no, you're just not drilling. So they don't even want to go to the next step.
Right. I'm happy to have the conversation with them. I'm happy to walk them through the process. But again, the videos tend to be a good resource for everybody to direct people to kind of get it to the next level. But yeah, I appreciate your pain. It's not something that's easy to do in some cases.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Infrared cameras. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
no.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
What would your recommendation be if the home inspector doesn't find any evidence inside or outside of of the home inspection for an exterior wall with stucco, but then recommends themselves to do a stucco inspection, although there's no physical evidence that they found. Because I had a seller who had pushback to that, saying, there's nothing inside, there's no outside, the stucco is 20 years old, we've lived here 3 years, there's never been a problem, and we don't think it's necessary. What do you say to that? I guess that's kind of a follow-up to the last question also, of like, it seems like they're recommending themselves for work that may or may not be necessary.
So any good inspector that's going to recommend stucco inspection should be able to have that conversation with you. And our position on it would be to look at the house. Was it built, in the 20s? I'm probably not real worried about it. Was it built in the last 15 or 20 years and there's no kickout flashings on the roof wall and there's no head flashings over the window? Then I'm pretty worried about it. And the problem is that you can look at that house and live in that house for 20 years and not know that there's a problem. Those houses that I showed you, the big full houses that were pulled off, those people didn't know they had a problem until somebody tested the house. So we tested the house technically and showed them what the problem was. The issue is that you cannot look at stucco and say that there's a problem just by looking at it. The problem exists in the wood behind the stucco. In the video, we talk about the fact that stains on stucco are not a good indicator of wood rot behind the stucco. So the fact that you have staining does not necessarily mean there's a problem. So the issue is that it's such a high price problem. It's not like a water heater, you're missing a roof or something where you're, yes, it's $10, $12, $15,000. Stucco problems start at 10,000 and rapidly go up to 50 to 100 grand, especially in the city of Philadelphia, where you've got a rear only stucco on a townhouse and there's no alley behind it. They're literally having to carry the material through the house and out the back door. And that just drives cost to get that taken care of. So the cost to take care of these things, even though on a square footage basis out in the sticks here where I live, we tend to tell people it's about $35 a square foot to remediate stucco, to get the old stucco off, repair the wood, put the new stucco on. In the city of Philadelphia, that all goes right out the window because depending on the situation, if we were in a project that it was a small alley, you couldn't even get a truck down the alley. The scaffolding on the front of the house could be no wider than 2 feet. So it had to be all custom. It was a train wreck and you had to walk all the material through the house out the back to deal with the back. And I think the cost on that got up to like $80, $90 a square foot. So, in the city of Philly, it's challenging. The problem is that if we miss it, right? If we don't call for a stucco inspection because even if we don't see anything inside, and we are always looking for the inside thing or the missing flashing thing to help push that narrative. But if we explain it to your client and they choose not to do it, I'm okay with that, just as long as they're educated. But generally speaking, we don't know what a house looks like. I've seen some of the prettiest looking stucco be a total disaster, and I've seen some of the nastiest looking stuff turn out just fine. So it is difficult. If there's any concern whatsoever, you can tell the inspector that's recommending this that we're not going to use you for the stucco inspection. We're going to use a different company. And do you still feel the same way? I would be okay with that if you said that to one of my guys. But I think that we try to educate people so that everybody's comfortable with the decision they're making, because it's a lot of money for the stucco inspection. It's a lot of problems if we find problems that you're going to have to deal with trying to get that deal to a close. So we can make a lot of hassle in a real estate transaction, and the best we can, we try not to do that. We try to make it. I want to get my buyer to the finish line. I do not want to blow up the real estate transaction. So at any cost, I'm going to try to get them to the closing table. And as long as everybody's reasonable, I have a really good high success rate of that.
Thanks.
Yep.
I had a quick question.
Sure, fire away.
Hey, so in my experience, when you have a home with stucco, if there's masonry behind the stucco, I've had a stucco inspection company come out and say, hey, there's masonry behind the stucco. It doesn't even really make sense in terms of cost or time for us to do this stucco inspection, because you don't have to worry about the wood rot, which is obviously the main issue and why stucco would need to be remediated or removed in the first place. Is there a sort of real estate agent or like informal way to figure out what material is behind stucco? And do you agree with sort of what I'm saying, that if there's masonry behind the stucco, having an invasive stucco inspection is almost unnecessary?
Agreed. Yeah, the only thing I'll caution you, and there is a simple way. If you take your fist and you bang on the wall and you don't hear like a drum sound, you feel like a smacking. Like if you go to an older Philadelphia, next time you're at a Philadelphia house or any house with brick, smack the brick with your fist, with the soft part of your hand here. Don't go crazy. Yep. Don't break your hand. But that smacking sound, that really solid thud, is what you're listening for. And you'll get that if the stucco is over block or brick. You'll hear more of a drumming sound if it's over wood.
Got it.
But what you have to be careful is that on a lot of the houses we're looking at in Philly, the front of the house is brick, right? The old brick or new brick, but the back of the house may be brick up to the second floor, and then they put a third floor on it, and that whole third floor, the parapet wall and all that is stucco over wood. So it can be a combination, but yeah, you can smack it and tell. Now, the other thing we generally tell our agents is don't put your neck out on this, because I don't want you to take any more risk. And risk is real. But let your home inspector take that risk. Say to him, okay, what do you feel that we're dealing with here? And do you recommend a stucco inspection? Because that's the guy that really should be making it. Because if you say that, this is all masonry and it turns out the whole parapet wall up on the roof and all that back second, third floor or whatever is stucco over wood, then there could be a problem later because you didn't properly evaluate it.
So do you think the safest thing to do by default as a real estate agent is when they're stucco on a home, say, hey, listen, I think the safest bet here, considering this property is covered with or has a good portion of stucco, is to get a stucco inspection, like right off the bat? Because we also know that sometimes, especially in a market like this, you have a 10-day due diligence period with scheduling and home inspectors being busy. Sometimes you can't get a home inspector out until the 5th or the 6th day of your due diligence period. And then when they're doing their walkthrough and they say, hey, listen, I really recommend you get a stucco inspection, based on the stucco company's scheduling, you may not be able to get a stucco company out to do an invasive test and get the results in the report back by the time that the 10-day period is over. I mean, do you think it's just smartest by default when a home has stucco, whether there's masonry behind it or wood sheathing or a combination of the two, to just say to your buyers, it's my recommendation and my professional opinion that you just get a stucco inspection right off the bat?
So it's going to depend a little bit on a couple of variables. If you're talking to me about something that was built in the 20s, 30s, or 40s down in the city and hasn't been heavily modified or added onto, then I think you can kind of like wait and see what the home inspector says. If it was built in the last 20, 25 years, and the probability is that, yes, we're going to err on the side of safety. What I've told a lot of my agents to do is schedule the home inspection and schedule the stucco inspection a day or two later. And if the home inspector comes in and says, yeah, we're good, we don't really need this, you can pull the plug on the stucco inspection, but you already got it set up in the queue. Yep. We have the ability, three of my guys are stucco and home inspectors, so we can actually, like a lot of the smaller Philly stuff, it's just simpler to do it during the home inspection. It doesn't take very long, and we can put everybody's mind at ease or figure out that there's a disaster going on rather quickly.
That's a great idea. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. I want to wrap up here because we're about out of time. I'll stay with you as long as you want answering questions, but I wanted to cover infrared cameras. I spent an awful lot of money being certified and having a very expensive camera in my truck, and I think the infrared cameras are amazing on the inside of the house. However, they do not see through anything. They only measure surface temperature, and in my humble opinion, and I know there's some guys out there running around doing them, and we have literally would love to say that a thermal camera can find moisture problems behind stucco, and it can in some limited cases, but like I told you earlier, you can have rotted wood that has low moisture content. You will never see it in a thermal camera, and a thermal camera is, I do a fair amount of work in court as an expert witness, and I would never go into a courtroom and with thermal imaging and say I found something. It's great on the inside of the house for missing insulation, for vaulted ceilings with water leaks around skylights. All my guys carry them. I think that they're really a good tool on the inside, but we would never, ever in 100 years ever suggest that it's a good idea to do it on the outside for stucco. The other problem is as soon as you tell the seller that you're going to do an infrared inspection, that's all they want to talk about. They don't want to let you drill holes. Oh, there's an option that doesn't drill holes, then we're going to do it. So it's not reliable to me. Many of the homes being repaired today will fail again. This is an unfortunate reality. Again, I said that the cutouts that are cutting around windows and doors, that's a really high fail rate in excess of 60%. If I told you what I really thought, you wouldn't believe me, so I'll just keep it to myself. Veneer stone is worse than stucco, so the lickum stickum stone, it's called MSV, manufactured stone veneer. If you want to sound really knowledgeable, if you tell an inspector, hey, what about the MSV, they will be impressed. So manufactured stone veneer, abbreviated MSV, is worse because it holds more water. It's not smooth. The water lays in the mortar joints, so we can actually have significantly more damage behind the manufactured stone veneer. True brick and stacked stone are installed differently, or at least they should be, with a space between the back of the stone and the brick. So this significantly reduces the risk factor. We don't see nearly the problems behind those, although they can have them, that we see behind stucco and MSV. That's my cell phone number. I want to be available to you. Try not to call me after like 1 o'clock in the morning. But if you've got a problem or question, text me a picture of it and say, Bill, I need your help here. We want to be a resource for you. And I think this is true of any great home inspector. They want to be a resource for you. So do what you need to do. If you've got questions, you want to email or report, whatever you've got, I want to be there for you to help you get through this process. And we'll do what we can. Any questions additional?
Yes, about the stone, how do you do an invasive test on that?
On the thin, yeah, somebody did ask that question. If we're talking about MSV, which is the thin cut stone that's stuck on top of a stucco base, we drill in the mortar joints between the stones. It's the same exact inspection. It's no different. The thick stack stone is so thick that we find it unreliable to drill through it. So we'll go in through outlets in the back of inside the home. We'll go through, we'll take the outlet cover off and go inside from inside. We'll be looking at the rim board underneath in the basement if we can get there. Brick is pretty simple. We drill in the mortar joints between the bricks and go in with a long set of probes and test it. So that's how we test them. It's very similar, especially the MSV is exactly the same as stucco. We just don't drill through the stone. We drill through the mortar joints between the stone.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Bill, is there any way we can get this presentation?
Absolutely. I'm going to send you a link to it.
Okay.
So you guys can look at it as much as you want. Hopefully you can get the video to work on your end, but it's on our website. If you want to watch it, I think it's a good, for those of you that are unindoctrinated. I mean, there's a number of agents on here that have obviously had a great deal of experience with stucco, but if you haven't really been through it, or you're a newer agent, the videos help take you through what the process is and what the findings mean. And there's actually a sample of a stucco report in there that'll help you. But yeah, absolutely. We'll send that over to you, Matt, pretty quickly here, so you have a link to it.
Okay, folks. So I just dropped into the chat the YouTube channel link for us for GPAR. Also in the chat is the link to Bill's website where that video that we had some problems with earlier resides. And then when we post that video up into YouTube, we'll also put the link to the presentation. We'll make sure we have that saved so it all is real good. As well as we'll push out a message to membership today or Monday with everything. So once we get everything up in its proper place, you guys can go back and revisit this presentation, which was dynamite. And also thank you to the members for popping in your questions. There was some really good stuff because you guys offered up some real world examples and the things that you see when you're out there doing your stuff and how it intersects with the stuff that Bill does day in and day out. As you can tell, I said it earlier, Bill's an expert guy. When you hear expert witness taking a stand at trial, they don't let non-experts do that. And that's a silly joke, but the bottom line is you have to know your stuff because a lot of things are at stake at a trial, and expert witnesses, their reputation and credibility is on the line. And, you want to talk about poking holes into a person or what they're testifying about. That's what happens with defense attorneys for sure.
Yeah, that's always fun, getting cross-examined.
Well, Matt, thank you for hosting. Bill, this was enormously helpful. I just found out about this session like 15 minutes before it started. So I'm so glad I got on this call, and thank you so much. It has been enormously enlightening and helpful. Thank you.
No, thank you guys for attending, taking time out of your schedule. There was over 60 people here, which is an impressive turnout on a Friday morning.
We had 89 at one point, Bill.
Wow, that's really awesome.
Yeah. So look, guys, we're going to wrap up. Coffee Talk Thursday, 8:30 a.m. Hope you'll join us. Great conversation all the time with Councilman Alan Dom. Keep an eye on your inbox for other stuff as well as the links to today's meeting. Have a great Friday. Have an awesome weekend. Thank you, Bill. Great stuff as usual. We love having you.
Thanks, Bill.
Awesome. It was good fun. Thanks.